the new God of Providence, the new gods of Providence, the new God of Providence, the new goddess of Providence, the new goddesses of Providence, the new goddess of Providence, the old God of Providence, the old gods of Providence, the old God of Providence, the old goddess of Providence, the old goddesses of Providence, the old goddess of Providence, the greater God of Providence, the greater gods of Providence, the greater God of Providence, the greater goddess of Providence, the greater goddesses of Providence, the greater goddess of Providence, the lesser God of Providence, the lesser gods of Providence, the lesser God of Providence, the lesser goddess of Providence, the lesser goddesses of Providence, the lesser goddess of Providence, the higher God of Providence, the higher gods of Providence, the higher God of Providence, the higher goddess of Providence, the higher goddesses of Providence, the higher goddess of Providence, the lower God of Providence, the lower gods of Providence, the lower God of Providence, the lower goddess of Providence, the lower goddesses of Providence, the lower goddess of Providence, the greater spirit of Providence, the greater spirits of Providence, the greater spirit of Providence, the lesser spirit of Providence, the lesser spirits of Providence, the lesser spirit of Providence, the higher spirit of Providence, the higher spirits of Providence, the higher spirit of Providence, the lower spirit of Providence, the lower spirits of Providence, the lower spirit of Providence, the major God of Providence, the major gods of Providence, the major God of Providence, the major goddess of Providence, the major goddesses of Providence, the major goddess of Providence, the minor God of Providence, the minor gods of Providence, the minor God of Providence, the minor goddess of Providence, the minor goddesses of Providence, the minor goddess of Providence, the superior God of Providence, the superior gods of Providence, the superior God of Providence, the superior goddess of Providence, the superior goddesses of Providence, the superior goddess of Providence, the inferior God of Providence, the inferior gods of Providence, the inferior God of Providence, the inferior goddess of Providence, the inferior goddesses of Providence, the inferior goddess of Providence, the ancestor God of Providence, the ancestor gods of Providence, the ancestor God of Providence, the ancestor goddess of Providence, the ancestor goddesses of Providence, the ancestor goddess of Providence, the ascendant God of Providence, the ascendant gods of Providence, the ascendant God of Providence, the ascendant goddess of Providence, the ascendant goddesses of Providence, the ascendant goddess of Providence, the descendant God of Providence, the descendant gods of Providence, the descendant God of Providence, the descendant goddess of Providence, the descendant goddesses of Providence, the descendant goddess of Providence, the transcendent God of Providence, the transcendent gods of Providence, the transcendent God of Providence, the transcendent goddess of Providence, the transcendent goddesses of Providence, the transcendent goddess of Providence, the past God of Providence, the past gods of Providence, the past God of Providence, the past goddess of Providence, the past goddesses of Providence, the past goddess of Providence, the present God of Providence, the present gods of Providence, the present God of Providence, the present goddess of Providence, the present goddesses of Providence, the present goddess of Providence, the future God of Providence, the future gods of Providence, the future God of Providence, the future goddess of Providence, the future goddesses of Providence, the future goddess of Providence, the authentic God of Providence, the authentic gods of Providence, the authentic God of Providence, the authentic goddess of Providence, the authentic goddesses of Providence, the authentic goddess of Providence, the synthetic God of Providence, the synthetic gods of Providence, the synthetic God of Providence, the synthetic goddess of Providence, the synthetic goddesses of Providence, the synthetic goddess of Providence, the progressive God of Providence, the progressive gods of Providence, the progressive God of Providence, the progressive goddess of Providence, the progressive goddesses of Providence, the progressive goddess of Providence, the regressive God of Providence, the regressive gods of Providence, the regressive God of Providence, the regressive goddess of Providence, the regressive goddesses of Providence, the regressive goddess of Providence, the ordinary God of Providence, the ordinary gods of Providence, the ordinary God of Providence, the ordinary goddess of Providence, the ordinary goddesses of Providence, the ordinary goddess of Providence, the extraordinary God of Providence, the extraordinary gods of Providence, the extraordinary God of Providence, the extraordinary goddess of Providence, the extraordinary goddesses of Providence, the extraordinary goddess of Providence, the static God of Providence, the static gods of Providence, the static God of Providence, the static goddess of Providence, the static goddesses of Providence, the static goddess of Providence, the dynamic God of Providence, the dynamic gods of Providence, the dynamic God of Providence, the dynamic goddess of Providence, the dynamic goddesses of Providence, the dynamic goddess of Providence, the land God of Providence, the land gods of Providence, the land God of Providence, the land goddess of Providence, the land goddesses of Providence, the land goddess of Providence, the sea God of Providence, the sea gods of Providence, the sea God of Providence, the sea goddess of Providence, the sea goddesses of Providence, the sea goddess of Providence, the sky God of Providence, the sky gods of Providence, the sky God of Providence, the sky goddess of Providence, the sky goddesses of Providence, the sky goddess of Providence, the God of Providence, the gods of Providence, the God of Providence, the goddess of Providence, the goddesses of Providence, the goddess of Providence, the half God of Providence, the half gods of Providence, the half God of Providence, the half goddess of Providence, the half goddesses of Providence, the half goddess of Providence, the vessel of Providence, the vessels of Providence, the vessel of Providence, the name of Providence, the names of Providence, the name of Providence, the person of Providence, the persons of Providence, the person of Providence, the persona of Providence, the personas of Providence, the persona of Providence, the personage of Providence, the personages of Providence, the personage of Providence, the personality of Providence, the personalities of Providence, the personality of Providence, the personification of Providence, the personifications of Providence, the personification of Providence, the image of Providence, the images of Providence, the image of Providence, the imagination of Providence, the imaginations of Providence, the imagination of Providence, the belief of Providence, the beliefs of Providence, the belief of Providence, the thought of Providence, the thoughts of Providence, the thought of Providence, the word of Providence, the words of Providence, the word of Providence, the action of Providence, the actions of Providence, the action of Providence, the reaction of Providence, the reactions of Providence, the reaction of Providence, the feeling of Providence, the feelings of Providence, the feeling of Providence, the situation of Providence, the situations of Providence, the situation of Providence, the circumstance of Providence, the circumstances of Providence, the circumstance of Providence, the environment of Providence, the environments of Providence, the environment of Providence, the relationship of Providence, the relationships of Providence, the relationship of Providence, the number of Providence, the numbers of Providence, the number of Providence, the formula of Providence, the formulas of Providence, the formula of Providence, the equation of Providence, the equations of Providence, the equation of Providence, the theory of Providence, the theories of Providence, the theory of Providence, the symbol of Providence, the symbols of Providence, the symbol of Providence, the color of Providence, the colors of Providence, the color of Providence, the thing of Providence, the things of Providence, the thing of Providence, the way of Providence, the ways of Providence, the way of Providence, the place of Providence, the places of Providence, the place of Providence, the time of Providence, the times of Providence, the time of Providence, the event of Providence, the events of Providence, the event of Providence, the result of Providence, the results of Providence, the result of Providence, the crown of Providence, the crowns of Providence, the crown of Providence, the throne of Providence, the thrones of Providence, the throne of Providence, the Providence King, the Providence Kings, the Providence Kingdom, the Providence Kingdoms, the Providence King subject, the Providence King subjects, the Providence King's dominion, the Providence King's dominions, the kingdom of Providence, the kingdoms of Providence, the kingdom of Providence, the Providence Queen, the Providence Queens, the Providence Queendom, the Providence Queendoms, the Providence Queen subject, the Providence Queen subjects, the Providence Queen's dominion, the Providence Queen's dominions, the Queendom of Providence, the Queendoms of Providence, the Queendom of Providence, the Providence Prince, the Providence Princes, the Providence Princedom, the Providence Princedoms, the Providence Princes subject, the Providence Princes subjects, the Providence Princes dominion, the Providence Princes dominions, the Princedom of Providence, the Princedoms of Providence, the Princedom of Providence, the Providence Princess, the Providence Princesses, the Providence Princessdom, the Providence Princessdoms, the Providence Princesses subject, the Providence Princesses subjects, the Providence Princesses dominion, the Providence Princesses dominions, the Princessdom of Providence, the Princessdoms of Providence, the Princessdom of Providence, the Lord of Providence, the Lords of Providence, the Lord of Providence, the Lordess of Providence, the Lordesses of Providence, the Lordess of Providence, the Priest of Providence, the Priests of Providence, the Priest of Providence, the Priestess of Providence, the Priestesses of Providence, the Priestess of Providence, the Ritual of Providence, the Rituals of Providence, the Ritual of Providence, the Shrine of Providence, the Shrines of Providence, the Shrine of Providence, the Temple of Providence, the Temples of Providence, the Temple of Providence, the Leader of Providence, the Leaders of Providence, the Leader of Providence, the Follower of Providence, the Followers of Providence, the Follower of Providence, the Natural Substance of Providence, the Natural Substances of Providence, the Natural Substance of Providence, the Supernatural Substance of Providence, the Supernatural Substances of Providence, the Supernatural Substance of Providence, the Temporal Substance of Providence, the Temporal Substances of Providence, the Temporal Substance of Providence, the Spiritual Substance of Providence, the Spiritual Substances of Providence, the Spiritual Substance of Providence, the Natural Form of Providence, the Natural Forms of Providence, the Natural Form of Providence, the Supernatural Form of Providence, the Supernatural Forms of Providence, the Supernatural Form of Providence, the Temporal Form of Providence, the Temporal Forms of Providence, the Temporal Form of Providence, the Spiritual Form of Providence, the Spiritual Forms of Providence, the Spiritual Form of Providence, the Age of Providence, the Ages of Providence, the Age of Providence, the Era of Providence, the Eras of Providence, the Era of Providence, the Awakener of Providence, the Awakeners of Providence, the Awakener of Providence, the Awakening of Providence, the Awakenings of Providence, the Awakening of Providence, the Realm of Providence, the Realms of Providence, the Realm of Providence, the Dimension of Providence, the Dimensions of Providence, the Dimension of Providence, the Zone of Providence, the Zones of Providence, the Zone of Providence, the Frequency of Providence, the Frequencies of Providence, the frequency of Providence, the century of Providence, the centuries of Providence, the century of Providence, the millennium of Providence, the millenniums of Providence, the millennium of Providence, the purpose of Providence, the purposes of Providence, the purpose of Providence, the meaning of Providence, the meanings of Providence, the meaning of Providence, the culture of Providence, the cultures of Providence, the culture of Providence, the demonstrator of Providence, the demonstrators of Providence, the demonstrator of Providence, the demonstration of Providence, the demonstrations of Providence, the demonstration of Providence, the manifester of Providence, the manifestors of Providence, the manifester of Providence, the manifestation of Providence, the manifestations of Providence, the manifestation of Providence, the presence of Providence, the presences of Providence, the presence of Providence, the glow of Providence, the glows of Providence, the glow of Providence, the goal of Providence, the goals of Providence, the goal of Providence, the plan of Providence, the plans of Providence, the plan of Providence, the book of Providence, the books of Providence, the book of Providence, the philosopher of Providence, the philosophers of Providence, the philosopher of Providence, the philosophy of Providence, the philosophies of Providence, the philosophy of Providence, the releaser of Providence, the releasers of Providence, the releaser of Providence, the release of Providence, the releases of Providence, the release of Providence, the variable of Providence, the variables of Providence, the variable of Providence, the cause of Providence, the causes of Providence, the cause of Providence, the effect of Providence, the effects of Providence, the effect of Providence, the journey of Providence, the journeys of Providence, the journey of Providence, the emergence of Providence, the emergences of Providence, the emergence of Providence, the source of Providence, the sources of Providence, the source of Providence, the originator of Providence, the originators of Providence, the originator of Providence, the origin of Providence, the origins of Providence, the origin of Providence, the forefather of Providence, the forefathers of Providence, the forefather of Providence, the foremother of Providence, the foremothers of Providence, the foremother of Providence, the ancestor of Providence, the ancestors of Providence, the ancestor of Providence, the descendant of Providence, the descendants of Providence, the descendant of Providence, the lineage of Providence, the lineages of Providence, the lineage of Providence, the heritage of Providence, the heritages of Providence, the heritage of Providence, the heir of Providence, the heirs of Providence, the heir of Providence, the co-heir of Providence, the co-heirs of Providence, the co-heir of Providence, the joint heir of Providence, the joint heirs of Providence, the joint heir of Providence, the dynasty of Providence, the dynasties of Providence, the dynasty of Providence, the force of Providence, the forces of Providence, the force of Providence, the law of Providence, the laws of Providence, the law of Providence, the pact of Providence, the pacts of Providence, the pact of Providence, the game of Providence, the games of Providence, the game of Providence, the mask of Providence, the masks of Providence, the mask of Providence, the armor of Providence, the armors of Providence, the armor of Providence, the sword of Providence, the swords of Providence, the sword of Providence, the shield of Providence, the shields of Providence, the shield of Providence, the force shield of Providence, the force shields of Providence, the force shield of Providence, the armored force shield of Providence, the armored force shields of Providence, the armored force shield of Providence, the champion of Providence, the champions of Providence, the champion of Providence, the guardian of Providence, the guardians of Providence, the guardian of Providence, the defender of Providence, the defenders of Providence, the defender of Providence, the protector of Providence, the protectors of Providence, the protector of Providence, the chant of Providence, the chance of Providence, the chant of Providence, the shape of Providence, the shapes of Providence, the shape of Providence, the cube of Providence, the cubes of Providence, the cube of Providence, the cuboid of Providence, the cuboids of Providence, the cuboid of Providence, the sphere of Providence, the spheres of Providence, the sphere of Providence, the spheroid of Providence, the spheroids of Providence, the spheroid of Providence, the prism of Providence, the prisms of Providence, the prism of Providence, the pyramid of Providence, the pyramids of Providence, the pyramid of Providence, the cylinder of Providence, the cylinders of Providence, the cylinder of Providence, the cone of Providence, the cones of Providence, the cone of Providence, the triangle of Providence, the triangles of Providence, the triangle of Providence, the circle of Providence, the circles of Providence, the circle of Providence, the semicircle of Providence, the semicircles of Providence, the semicircle of Providence, the square of Providence, the squares of Providence, the square of Providence, the rectangle of Providence, the rectangles of Providence, the rectangle of Providence, the parallelogram of Providence, the parallelograms of Providence, the parallelogram of Providence, the rhombus of Providence, the rhombuses of Providence, the rhombus of Providence, the trapezoid of Providence, the trapezoids of Providence, the trapezoid of Providence, the polygon of Providence, the polygons of Providence, the polygon of Providence, the pentagon of Providence, the pentagons of Providence, the pentagon of Providence, the hexagon of Providence, the hexagons of Providence, the hexagon of Providence, the septagon of Providence, the septagons of Providence, the septagon of Providence, the octagon of Providence, the octagons of Providence, the octagon of Providence, the nonagon of Providence, the nonagons of Providence, the nonagon of Providence, the decagon of Providence, the decagons of Providence, the decagon of Providence, the evolution of Providence, the evolutions of Providence, the evolution of Providence, the revolution of Providence, the revolutions of Providence, the revolution of Providence, the elemental art of Providence, the elemental arts of Providence, the elemental art of Providence, the elemental science of Providence, the elemental sciences of Providence, the elemental science of Providence, the elemental principle of Providence, the elemental principles of Providence, the elemental principle of Providence, the elemental technology of Providence, the elemental technologies of Providence, the elemental technology of Providence, the low elemental art of Providence, the low elemental arts of Providence, the low elemental art of Providence, the low elemental science of Providence, the low elemental sciences of Providence, the low elemental science of Providence, the low elemental principle of Providence, the low elemental principles of Providence, the low elemental principle of Providence, the low elemental technology of Providence, the low elemental technologies of Providence, the low elemental technology of Providence, the high elemental art of Providence, the high elemental arts of Providence, the high elemental art of Providence, the high elemental science of Providence, the high elemental sciences of Providence, the high elemental science of Providence, the high elemental principle of Providence, the high elemental principles of Providence, the high elemental principle of Providence, the high elemental technology of Providence, the high elemental technologies of Providence, the high elemental technology of Providence, the agent of Providence, the agents of Providence, the agent of Providence, the agency of Providence, the agencies of Providence, the agency of Providence, the amplifier of Providence, the amplifiers of Providence, the amplifier of Providence, the amplification of Providence, the amplifications of Providence, the amplification of Providence, the enhancer of Providence, the enhancers of Providence, the enhancer of Providence, the enhancement of Providence, the enhancements of Providence, the enhancement of Providence, the magnifier of Providence, the magnifiers of Providence, the magnifier of Providence, the magnification of Providence, the magnifications of Providence, the magnification of Providence, the influencer of Providence, the influencers of Providence, the influencer of Providence, the influence of Providence, the influences of Providence, the influence of Providence, the emanator of Providence, the emanators of Providence, the emanator of Providence, the emanation of Providence, the emanations of Providence, the emanation of Providence, the converger of Providence, the convergers of Providence, the converger of Providence, the convergence of Providence, the convergences of Providence, the convergence of Providence, the aura of Providence, the auras of Providence, the aura of Providence, the impression of Providence, the impressions of Providence, the impression of Providence, the intelligence of Providence, the intelligences of Providence, the intelligence of Providence, the sophistication of Providence, the sophistications of Providence, the sophistication of Providence, the genius of Providence, the geniuses of Providence, the genius of Providence, the polymath of Providence, the polymaths of Providence, the polymath of Providence, the psychic of Providence, the psychics of Providence, the psychic of Providence, the knowledge of Providence, the knowledges of Providence, the knowledge of Providence, the understanding of Providence, the understandings of Providence, the understanding of Providence, the wisdom of Providence, the wisdoms of Providence, the wisdom of Providence, the secret of Providence, the secrets of Providence, the secret of Providence, the mystery of Providence, the mysteries of Providence, the mystery of Providence, the revelation of Providence, the revelations of Providence, the revelation of Providence, the tactic of Providence, the tactics of Providence, the tactic of Providence, the strategy of Providence, the strategies of Providence, the strategy of Providence, the strength of Providence, the strengths of Providence, the strength of Providence, the might of Providence, the might of Providence, the might of Providence, the power of Providence, the powers of Providence, the power of Providence, the authority of Providence, the authorities of Providence, the authority of Providence, the dominion of Providence, the dominions of Providence, the dominion of Providence, the rhythm of Providence, the rhythms of Providence, the rhythm of Providence, the melody of Providence, the melodies of Providence, the melody of Providence, the music of Providence, the musics of Providence, the music of Providence, the lyric of Providence, the lyrics of Providence, the lyric of Providence, the song of Providence, the songs of Providence, the song of Providence, the dance of Providence, the dances of Providence, the dance of Providence, the spirit of Providence, the spirits of Providence, the spirit of Providence, the soul of Providence, the souls of Providence, the soul of Providence, the body of Providence, the bodies of Providence, the body of Providence, the mark of Providence, the marks of Providence, the mark of Providence, the promise of Providence, the promises of Providence, the promise of Providence, the visionary of Providence, the visionaries of Providence, the visionary of Providence, the vision of Providence, the visions of Providence, the vision of Providence, the picture of Providence, the pictures of Providence, the picture of Providence, the sound of Providence, the sounds of Providence, the sound of Providence, the tongue of Providence, the tongues of Providence, the tongue of Providence, the language of Providence, the languages of Providence, the language of Providence, the communication of Providence, the communications of Providence, the communication of Providence, the people of Providence, the peoples of Providence, the people of Providence, the society of Providence, the societies of Providence, the society of Providence, the fortress of Providence, the fortresses of Providence, the fortress of Providence, the government of Providence, the governments of Providence, the government of Providence, the city of Providence, the cities of Providence, the city of Providence, the nation of Providence, the nations of Providence, the nation of Providence, the civilization of Providence, the civilizations of Providence, the civilization of Providence, the world of Providence, the worlds of Providence, the world of Providence,